image we will be starting with today. It is an old barn set on the edge of a lazy country river, and in the background the rolling hills with sort of the touch of spring coming on, and a large tree in the background. It's a morning sky, that shell pink color. So I'm going to help you through all of this, but first let's get the image on the paper. So what I have here is the image that you will have downloaded from my website, and some graphite paper, which you can buy at your local art store, and you can buy it in fairly large sheets. I cut this to suit the size of the image I'll be working on. The paper I'm using right now is a 300-pound Arches paper. You don't need to have that heavier paper, especially when you're starting, because it is a bit expensive. So I'm just going to lay it down here and center my image on the paper. And I'm going to take a different colored pen so that I can see where I've actually traced. Okay? And so don't press hard. You don't want to put furrows in the paper underneath. You don't want to dent the papers. You just want to basically transfer this image basically here. So I'm just going to start with the back hills here. Okay, so I've got that in, and then my last line here is to just put in the river line there. A lot of this is going to be obscured once you start painting. So, a couple lines I missed there. Okay, we're all set to go. So here's the image, all ready to go. Oops. Here's the image all ready to go. And your next step now is to tape it down to a painting board. So though there are a lot of different ways of doing this, I'm not necessarily conventional. I do things that the easiest, most stress-free way possible. So I'm just taking some painter's tape, masking tape, and I am going to tape the image down to the board. This is as I said, a fairly heavy paper. The lighter the paper you have, the more it's going to have a tendency to buckle and rumple when you do your painting. I like to use the heavy paper for that reason, and I don't have to stretch it and staple it down to. Now we're ready to start. But before we get started on the painting, I'm going to give you a couple of pointers, really important pointers in terms of mixing color and the color wheel in terms of how they relate to each other, and just a few pointers on how brush strokes can enhance your painting as well. So these are really basics. I won't take a long time with this, but they're important. So typically what a lot of painters use, and you can see this is well used here, they squeeze their tubes of color paint into here, and then they just draw out the color when they need to do it. I started out this way, but I found that the colors got very muddy. You don't know what color was left on there from the time before. You're trying to get a nice rich red out, and you've got a bit of blue there because you're trying to make a purple. So I don't use these anymore. It's really up to you what you want to use. I have found a beautiful way to me, and that is I just use these little porcelain bowls. I bought them at the Dollarama store, and you can use anything, but it needs to be white, because you need to see the color as you're mixing it. So I'm going to start mixing some colors here to start, so that I have lots of rich watercolors, and I'm not having to, in the middle of a wash, remix color. That is just the worst thing that you can do. You need to have lots of rich color right handy, and this is a beautiful way to do it. Nice thing about this too is that when they dry out, that's fine. You just come in with a squirt bottle and revive them with a bit of water, and you're ready to go, and you have your colors already mixed, just the way you like them. Another good thing to have is an old brush that doesn't hold a whole lot of water, because when you're mixing paints, you don't want it soaking up all of your precious paint. I'm going to start with the lightest colors first. This color that I'm using is New Gamboge, and we will be giving you a list of the paint colors that you will need. It will be on the website, so you won't have to worry about that. There will be a list of items that I recommend to use. So I'm mixing up some yellow here, and the spray bottle is an absolute must. You have water, and you can add just little bits at a time. Okay, so I have my yellow. I'll get the pure colors out first. Now I am going to use a little phthalo blue for the sky. I'll mix it down here because I don't want it too close to the yellow in case they decide to splatter. Okay, so I have my yellow mix and my blue, and then I'm going to need a red, which is this red here that I use is alizarin crimson. What else do we need in this picture? We need some green. We need a little bit of this. This is called Deep Quin Gold. It's a beautiful color by Daniel Smith. If you can get it, that's great. Another comparable color, but not quite as intense, is burnt sienna. All right, so now we have a red, we have a yellow, we have a burnt sienna or a deep quin gold, a rust color, phthalo blue. We definitely, absolutely have to have green. There's one thing you have to know about greens. I see this all the time in beginner artists. They take green right out of the tube. It's awful. It's like caterpillar juice or Heinz pickled green. It's just an awful. You always have to work with greens and tone them down a bit. So I'm going to take a little bit of Hooker's Green Deep, and I'm going to mix a little bit of that up here. And I'm going to add some yellow to brighten it up a bit. That will really soften the green. And then I will probably add a little bit of the Deep Quin Gold just to tone it down. It's a little bit painstaking, but it's an important process because if your colors aren't right, it doesn't matter how well you've painted it, it looks awful. You really do have to work. I will sometimes, with a painting, take an entire afternoon trying different colors and trying them together just to make sure that it reads beautifully as a whole, because some colors are just not nice with other colors. You want to experiment. That's the only really way to learn, is to experiment. But you don't need to buy and spend a lot of money on buying a whole bunch of tubes of colors. I basically work with about a maximum of 7 colors at all times. If you're going to mix a light green, start with your lightest color first. You could add an awful lot of yellow to that green before you get what you want, and you'll see what I mean here. So I'm going to take a bit of that green and add it here. Okay, so there we have it. We have a nice, beautiful spring green, new growth. So what I have here is this is again a dollar store item. It's a butter dish. And when I want to have some really deep darks, I put a little bit of sepia, a little touch of phthalo blue, just like little soldiers in a row here. And a little bit of this Deep Quin Gold or burnt sienna. They're kind of interchangeable. If you can't get the Daniel Smith Deep Quin, then this will be fine. I'm going to set this aside for now. We're going to get, and when we need it, I will bring it out. Okay, so I'm going to start with the sky. Well, a little thing on brushes here. I'll just show you some of the brushes that I use. And I will turn this over so you can see them. This is called a mop brush. It is a number 12. I have a number 20 round brush. You can get different sizes of round brushes and different size brushes. They have to suit the size of painting that you're working with. If you've got a small little 4x6 painting that you're working on, you don't want to be using these great big brushes. So get the size of brush that suits what you're working with at the time. So we've got, and also you will need a flat brush. These are good for putting in washes, straight lines, that kind of thing. You really do need one of those. Here's a smaller one just for smaller paintings here. For today's painting, I'm not sure. I'm going to start with my mop brush, and I'm going to start putting some color in. I'm going to start on the sky. So I'll just turn this over here. And I'm using my mop brush, and this is a great brush because it's very loose and it holds lots and lots of water, and you can actually lay down lots of water and color without running out. This is called the wet into wet technique. I'm just kind of going around the edges of the trees. I'm not worried about going around every little corner or anything like that, but you don't want to have a hard line there either. So I've got some dampness down here, and it's a morning sky, so we want very soft blue. I don't know if you can see the dampness from there, but you want it just shiny damp. You don't want big rivers of water running through it, areas that are a lot wetter than the others. What I'll do typically too, so that you don't have water running back into your painting, is just kind of wipe the sides here. The reason you want to have it damp is when you do a brush stroke on dry paper, it just stays exactly where your brush lays it. With water, and this is the beautiful thing about watercolors, when you give watercolor a place to go, it moves in such natural ways, just the way nature does. And that is just one of those things you can't, really hard to achieve with any other medium. Watercolor has its own nature, and part of the journey is just discovering how to work with that. I am going to start probably at the top here with a very light bit of blue. Remember, when you're doing skies, don't make it solid. You want to leave some lights and darks. Anything solid, it feels like you're running into a brick wall. You want a place for your eye to move through in the sky. So I'm going to leave some whites. And I don't typically go right straight across either. If you want to have a very peaceful sky, that's good. I have a tendency to like to come in at an angle. And I'm just feeling my way as I go here. And I'm leaving a little bit of white for the clouds. Brush that in a little bit deeper here. And remember, paint dries 50% lighter than what it goes on at. Okay, so I'm going to kind of leave off there. I've got the starts of a blue sky. Then I'm going to come in with a little bit of alizarin crimson. Not too heavy. It's a very powerful color, as is phthalo blue. Coming in from the tape, you come into the picture. You don't want to start in the middle somewhere. You don't want any hard lines in the sky. And I'm going to sweep in a little bit of this alizarin crimson here. That shell pink that you see early in the morning. And then I'm going to leave it. One thing you don't want to do is mess with it once you have it down. If you start dropping in a different consistency, a wetter consistency of paint, it's going to push the paint away where you've laid it down. So you really, once you've laid it down, you just want it to rest. Now, since this is water down here, it's going to basically be reflecting what's happening up here in the sky. So I'm going to do the same thing with the same colors. I'm going to lay in the water down here. Okay. And so, since the water reflects the sky, it's like a mirror image. So your pink in the water is going to be more or less towards here, and then your blue is showing in towards the bottom. So we'll start with a little bit of pink. You don't have to come in here very heavy. You're just moving in a little bit, just enough to give the viewer's eye a sense of the fact that it's reflecting. It's pretty simple to show reflections because the human eye will just pick that up right away as water. All right. So I have the pink in. I'm just going to drop in a little bit of blue. You don't have to fill it right in. You can just put some strokes in like this. And then just let it do its thing. You don't want to put your colors in here for the trees and the back hills because it's just going to shoot right up and bleed into the sky. So at this stage, you need to dry your painting. Okay. So we have done the sky, and we have thrown the same kind of water reflections into the water below, and everything is dry. So now we can go ahead and start painting in the background. So we see that there's a distant hill in the background. So we want to use sort of muted colors. We don't want it to jump forward because the brighter colors have a tendency to come forward in your painting, and more muted colors have a tendency to go back. So we want this to be in the far distance. What I'm going to do is I will lay down a little bit of water in here just for some softness. Okay, that's just so it runs nice and freely. I'm just working. I'm not worried about that tree trunk. It's going to be a dark brown, so you can always paint right over the green that you've put in there. So you don't really have to be a slave to that there at all. So now I have a little bit of water down there. And I think I will use a little bit of yellow. So I'm just going to, I might change brushes here. I'm getting into some smaller spaces. So I have my round brush here, and I'm just going to gently nudge in some color here. I've got my new Gamboge yellow in here. So this picture is about spring. I'm going to let it run down a bit. And there's the hill that extends on the other side of the house, or the barn here. I'm going to throw some yellows into that. Now it's still damp and wet, so now I can do what you call charging in other colors. So what that means is that you have a color and you mix in some other colors and let them blend naturally. Paint right to the edge of the tape. Don't come to a halt outside of that. You'll have a nice clean edge when you take the tape off. Okay, so I think I'll add some of that nice spring green, a little bit of that in there. It's kind of a nice muted green. You see, I'm just dabbing it in. And as you can see here, this is why watercolors is so beautiful, because it does everything so naturally. So I've got that new Gamboge in there, that lighter green that I mixed with a bit of yellow and blue. Okay, and now I'm going to add a bit of darker green near the bottom where the shadows are. And you see how that just naturally blooms into trees and bushes and like that. And it's always nice to have a fine little brush like this just to get into those little spaces like that. Just kind of tweak it a bit here. Okay, so we have this background, and it's being touched by the sun. I think at this point too, while I'm using these same colors, I can work on the foliage of the tree. So I might just put a little bit of a dampness down here like this. And you want to use brush strokes that actually describe the subject that you're working on. If you have a round circle, you're not going to use up and down strokes like this. You're going to follow the curve of the object. That helps you define the object too. Brush strokes are very important. Okay, so do you see I'm just kind of dancing my brush across, feeling the tree. You have to kind of feel what it is. Imagine it in your mind's eye. You're looking through sun-dappled leaves. And so I've got some colors in here. You see a little bit of the sky showing in through behind. That's where the birds fly through. Okay. So I'm kind of happy with that. So I've decided that this green was a little bit too green. So I've added a little more of the burnt sienna to it just to see. And now we have more of a natural green. I always have a testing paper on the side, even if just to test my brush strokes first, like that, and to just test my color as well. It could be anything. So now this tree is still a little bit wet, and now I'm going to add the green, some deeper darks. And I'm going to just be nice and slow about this. Take your time and feel it. Feel where you feel the darks would be and where the sun would hit in the foliage. And you know, you can always come back to do this. It's best not to overwork any part of your painting. It's nice to kind of get an overall feel for it, and then you'll see what you need to enhance. Because if you try to finish one project at a time, it's so overworked. And it doesn't look right until you've got the whole painting at a more or less same stage of doneness. I'm not going to do this distant hedge right now because this is still wet here. I don't want to paint the barn first because I'm going to put the walls in too deep or too long. I want to put the foliage in front first so that I know how far down to come on the barn walls. If you put in a dark wall, you can't put any foliage in front of it. So I think that I will work with this little shrub in here. And I would like to change the color up a bit so that it's quite a bit different than this. I might give it a different shade altogether. In fact, because it's in behind the house, maybe I'll blue it out a little more. So I think I will add the green. And I'm kind of working around the chimney of the house. You can come down, right down over the fence. Don't worry about that. That's going to be dark brown later. And you don't want to have to paint around that at all. So I have that color in there. I'm thinking I might add a little bit of this color in here, just to change the color. And perhaps a little of the blue. I have my mixtures here. Burnt sienna and blue and the rust. And I'm getting kind of a grayed out blue here that I'm just going to add. Okay. Okay. You can just let it do its thing now. So now I'm going to do the foreground. And I explained before that you don't want to do the foreground or the house before you do the foreground here, because you're going to come up here with little things, little trees and bushes and grasses. And I'm just putting a little bit of water down here. You can try it dry. It'll be much deeper. So at the very top, I'm going to put some rust for some of the dried grass. And if some of the colors run down in the grass, that's totally okay because it's going to be quite... Okay, so I'm just kind of dropping this in and letting it go where it will. Sometimes the paint does much better things than you have in mind. Okay, if you have some whites left over, don't worry about that too much either. You can always come in, as I said before, with a fine little brush and fill in some of those. Okay, now I'm going to come in with my mixture. This mixture of phthalo blue, sepia, and deep quin gold, when you mix them back and forth like this, make a beautiful deep dark. I'm going to test it to make sure I like it. Might add a little more of the... And I'm just going to come in and sweep it in. Just kind of let this come along. Leave some of the other light areas showing through. And remember, you can always come back and fix things, but you can't come back and fix something that you've overworked. Okay, so I'm using kind of very natural, nature-like brush strokes. Nature doesn't really have straight lines, so you don't want to be using straight lines here. You want to kind of use something that can imitate grasses blowing in the breeze. I'm going to add some of that deep blues in here just for a little bit of excitement. And I'm just going to come in along the bottom. This is the top of the riverbank. Okay, so I'm going to just let that dry. I have my fine little brush. I see a great big white mark here, so I'm just kind of... What you can do here, which is kind of interesting, is you can take the end of a brush and pull some colors through. Get some texture. Sometimes that's better than the heavier end of a paintbrush. See, I can even do this. I can even scrape some of this down into the water below, like that. I'm not too worried about that. That's the beginning of your water reflections and waves. Now, I don't want to start the water right now because what will happen is if I wet this water again and bring some of this color down for reflection, you're going to lose all the color. It's just going to drain right out of your ground area here. So it's just going to drain. So you want to kind of let this dry a bit, and you're going to use very much the same colors here on the water as we've used up here. And remember, it's a muddy bank and it's a lazy river, and so it doesn't have a lot of waves or anything like that. It's kind of smooth. So we've got this in now, and can you see now why, if I had painted the house, where it would have been a problem here? You see, now I can just paint around these areas here and tuck that house back right into the foliage there. At this point here, I could do the tree trunk. I'm just going to wait for this to dry for a few minutes. And I might use I want a nice deep dark. Just be careful that you're not dragging yourself through the paint you just put on. Now, it's really important when you are doing a painting to understand where the light source is coming. In this case, it is coming from the right. So you want to make sure that, because you can see that on the house, it's going to be lighter on this side. So you want to make sure that everything you paint reflects the fact that the light is coming in from the right here. So I'm going to take some of this color here and bring it over to the left here. It's a little bit too blue, so I'm going to add some rust here. And just sort of put it down one side of the trunk. And in the areas where the light doesn't necessarily hit, and just use clear water to bring out the colors, to soften the edge and bring out the colors that you've already laid down here. And tuck in a few branches here and there. Try to use a very thin brush for this. Oh, I made that mistake on purpose. So what I've done is I've dragged my hand through this and brought it into the water. So that happens sometimes. So now I am going to work on the water, and I'm going to have to work that reflection in. So I'm just going to kind of soften it here with a bit of water. Now this color is mostly dried, so I can bring some of it down. Do you see how it's blooming down into the river below? The colors from above. And I don't know about that. I think I'm going to have to put in some there we go. See, I just disappeared that problem, just like that. And so you're, of course, using brush strokes that imitate water. You're, as I said before, it's really important that your brush strokes are mimicking what it is you're painting. That it means a lot less work for you in trying to correct any problems. Now I'm going to just soften this line at the bottom here, because we are getting a line. Just disappearing it by touching into the bottom of that color with a brush filled with clear water. Okay, so now we have the reflection in. I'm just going to leave that alone for now. I might come back in and add some deeper reflections later. I'll see. Again, I'm going to see how the whole painting looks and decide what it needs. You can't tell in the initial stages what it really needs. That's why you sort of have to work with the whole thing as a whole. So now I am going to start on the shed itself. And I'm going to use a smaller round brush here. Now we know that the sun is coming from this side, so of course these sides are going to be lighter. That mark didn't really come through here, so I'm just going to add. If some of your marks don't come through, just pencil it in with a pencil. I see a couple of areas here that could use a little bit of touching up here. Okay. See how you can come in afterwards and kind of fill in some of those little whites. I might even add a little bit of yellow in there for a touch of sunlight. That's hitting some of these areas here. There we go. Okay. When your painting is almost dry, you can actually scrape some color off. If it's still wet, the paint will still run back into the scrape that you just made. So, but if it's too dry, it won't work either. You'll figure that out after you do this a few times. So I might just scrape in a few things along the bank here. I might just do a stone or something. Okay, so I'm just taking this and I'm holding it very stiff like this. This is a palette knife. And I'm just maybe just putting a little bit of a texture in front here, like this. And I might do a few scrapes of grass. Just remember how far it is away, so you don't want them too big. Okay, so I've just added a little bit of texture here, that's all. So I'm just showing that that's something that can be done. So I'm going to dry this now. Now I'll start with the shed here. So I will start with the lightest side first, and it's kind of a combination. It's old weathered wood. So I use a combination of a little bit of sepia, a little bit of phthalo blue, and a little bit of this deep quin gold or burnt sienna. And I will just kind of mix it on the side with my butter dish here. And I'm just kind of bringing all the colors out until I see something that I find is to my liking, close enough. So I'm kind of getting there now. So I'm mixing. I'm just kind of drawing out some color that I feel would be a nice barn color. I can actually tell in this dish whether or not it's what I want. All right, so I am going to just come in from under the eave. And if you have too much color, wash it out and just bring it across like that. And I will basically do that all along one side. It's kind of nice too if you add maybe a little bit of rust to it, because different parts weather differently. Don't worry about the windows. They're going to be dark, so you're going to put those in later, so don't worry about painting around those. Bring it down to the grass here. And if you find this is too dark, you can always, once it's dry, lift it out, and I will show you that technique as well. So we have in the light side, you can actually bring it around to this side, so you just have some continuity of color here. In fact, I like that color on the dark side here a little better. So I might just lift some of this out. Give it the sense of sun hitting it. That's going to be dark, so I'm not worried about that. So I have your basic color in here. I can add the texture in the barn boards later, once it's all dry. You want this side to dry before you go on to this dark side here, because the two sides will run together. So now we're going to do the barn roof, and that's just pure rust. It's like kind of almost like a dry brush technique. You're going to take a dry brush and you're kind of just going to start at the top and experiment a little bit on a piece of paper. Get your brush just the right amount of dry strokes in it here. So I'm going to work along the roof, just dragging the brush and adding the rust. You may have noticed that I change hands all the time. I'm ambidextrous, so don't. I'll use whatever hand is handy here. Okay. Some of my students got frustrated with that because they were only able to use the one hand to paint, but you'll try both. Okay, so I've got the texture in here on the roof. I can always come back in here like that. Okay, so now this is dry enough that I can start to add the darks to the shadow side of the barn. Actually, I have the far roof right here that I should probably get some color into. I'm going to use the same color combination, the sepia, the phthalo blue, and the rust. I'm going to test the color, and it is a very nice deep dark. I'm going to add a little bit of water here with my squirt bottle, which is absolutely must when you're painting because you can re-wet them. And okay, so I have a nice dark here. So I'm going to come in on the corner under the eaves. Now, it's a bit dry, so I'm going to add some water to my brush. Now, the nice thing about using these three colors together is that you'll get a little bit of each color coming through. A little bit of the rust, a little bit of the brown, a little bit of blue, which really is just a beautiful way to have some variation in a dark. So I'm following the roof line here. In fact, I can even do this eaves here, like that. Okay, so this is a bit of a fussy part here. So you're just going to take your time and work that in. And I have a little bits of white along the top there. That's probably okay. I might just add a bit of color in there later for the tips of the grass. There's the side of the building there. Okay, the chimneys will be dark, so I'll just use they will be dark against the sky, so I'm just going to put those in. There we go. Now we also have this far wall that is facing the other way from the light, so I'm going to do the same thing there. Let's get some darks in there. But I don't want it quite as dark here. Just watch your edges there. You don't want to have crooked walls. You want to make sure you get those right. Okay, so we have that. All right, so now we've got basically the shadow side in on the barn, and we've got the light side. So at this point, you can let that dry. Then you can decide if you want to come in and add a little more texturing along the sides. Do that before you get your windows and everything in, because then that makes it more difficult to you'll have to work around it. I want to add a few more darks along the front here, I believe. This is actually a really wonderful technique here. I use my palette knife a lot. I'm actually going to take some of this. Okay, so you see here what I've done. I've got all those three colors on my palette knife, and I'm just going to take it and kind of scrape it along the ground like this. Add just a little bit of texture here and there. Follow what's really kind of going on. This is something you probably want to practice with a little bit. Okay. being all canned by the river there. So I'm basically just going to scrape some color in here, a little bit of a texture. It's important to know too, you don't want the picture to be consistent. So if I had a lot of dark here, you don't want to do it consistently like soldiers in a row all the way across. Painting and light and everything changes. So get a little bit of grass pulled out of there too as well. I'm going to come along the river's edge with some deeper color here because it's wet. So this is a great way to do it. The palette knife just makes things look very natural, like they grew there. Okay. Okay, I'm pretty happy with that. You don't want to overwork it. And so now here's where I can also decide that I am going to put in a little more color in the water. So this is where I actually like to use two brushes. One with the color and one to wash it off, especially when it comes to water. And I am, of course, going to test it before I come down. Make sure that the color is right. I need to add some more water here. So I want the same color basically that's on the riverbank. So remember, when you do water, you really are, you're not necessarily looking at the marks you're making, but the marks in between. We do have the house here. And so we are going to, actually what I'd like to do at this point is take a little bit of this green color here. And just has to come down below. And it's probably somewhere in the bottom here. Okay. Now remember how shapes go in the water. They're reflected off the top of the waves. Okay. And if you go a little bit too far, you can take your brush and just wash out the edges, disappear them. But that's kind of nice there. That kind of makes a statement. So it gives you the sense, again, of more reflection. Along the shoreline, I am going to come in with the same colors that are up here, more or less. I'm going to go about this very carefully because I don't want to overdo it. But basically, I'm going to work with this structure right here. Just give you the sense that it's here. I'm dragging the brush back and forth like this. And some of it is melted into the green there. That's okay. I don't like this line here. It came in too much of an angle. So I might just wash this. Wash this out a little bit, soften it right up. This wave ended in too much of a bump, so I'm just going to wash that out a bit too. So now you have the sense of the reflection and the shed. So we're almost finished here. I am going to take a little bit of dry brush and put a little more rust into the side of the building here. Again, it has to be fairly dry. You want to just scrape in a bit of color. So now this is all dry, I can do that. You can also use your paper towel if you found you put a little bit too much on, and just go like this. Now this is a good time to put your shadow in as well. So I'm going to use the same shadow as I have here, but maybe with just a touch more blue in it. So we have the sun shining, but of course there's an eaves hanging out. So you want to give the sense of the eave that comes out over the edge of the wall. And there you have it there. Okay, all of a sudden it becomes way more dimensional. Same color right here, I'm going to do right here. The shadow on the eaves. I don't really like how deep a color that is there. That's in too great of a shadow, so I'm going to lift a little bit. So when you lift, you must clean your brush, clear water, and just kind of blot it on a paper towel. And just lift a bit, and now you can see here it just gives it a little more depth. Solid colors are really boring. You want to have a sense of light play in something. And I might just lift out a bit of the door here. Just the hint of a door, nothing too fancy, just something. Just add a little bit of mystery here. And of course this roof over here has a bit of a shadow, so I am going to shadow that out a little bit here. Okay. I think I will add a little bit more red here. Now in this painting, the focal point, of course, is the barn. And the reason that is so is because I want it to be, is because it has the darkest darks against the lightest lights. So in other words, the human eye will pick out the darkest and the lightest objects that are close to each other. That's called value, okay? And that's a beautiful way to do paintings. You don't really have to use very many colors at all. Okay, so I'm just touching up a little bit of color in here. You know, this is what you call tweaking. You come in here and you see a few places where you'd like to bounce it up a bit. Okay. This tree here, I'm going to re-wet it. See that I'm just showing you can come back in and do things after the fact. It doesn't have to be done in your first go over. So I'm adding just a little bit of a shadow in here because it is in behind. And I'll just soften those lines a bit. So I'm going to look around here and see if there's anything else I think that needs to be added. I think a little bit of a definition on this eave here, a little bit here, a little bit in here. These are just the final strokes. These are done at the 5 to midnight. Okay, you don't do all of these little details until the very end, because then otherwise you'll restrict yourself. If you do these details to begin with, then you have to paint around them, and it really restricts your ability to do anything else with the painting once you've done that. So now I'm adding the windows here and here. If I had added them first, I would have had to go through them with the shadow, spreading the color around, and just not a good thing. Okay, so here I've got the windows in here. And I would say that we are done. I think I'd like to add just a little more in this tree here. So I might wet it a bit and just add a few darks. Nothing major, just enough. There's just a little more of a value change in here. Just remember to use sensuous brush strokes. Nature is round and sensuous. There aren't straight lines. There we go. Okay. I believe we're finished. Okay, I'll show you what we have here now. There we go. Beautiful painting, I think. Okay, so there's our country barn on the edge of a stream. So we're finished our project for today. Thank you for joining me, and join me for our next painting project.